Well, welcome back. I'm Kari Wilson, Communications Director here at Two Cities, joined always with Pastor Kyle. And
Glad to be here.
Are in week 4 of our new podcast.
Week 5.
Week 5, that's right.
Lee was episode 4, yes.
See, I was not here.
That's right.
So, selective memory. No, but we're in week 5 of our Open Bible, Open Life podcast and really just having a blast here, having great conversations. Kyle, what was it like to sit down with Lee Strobel?
Well, in general, he was just so kind. The moment I met him at the beginning, before I didn't meet him until just before he went out for the 9 o'clock service, probably about an hour beforehand. He was just warm, joyful, excited. Immediately told me that he lost weight. Like that was one of the first things he told me. I was like, all right. Yeah. And then to get one, I was just grateful for him to say, yeah, in the midst of 3 services. That's why I started the way I did, asking him about it. Hey, yes, I'll also jump in for an hour-long podcast. And then if you haven't listened to, I know you have, if the people listening haven't listened to it, it was just fascinating. Just where it went, I wasn't sure where it was going to go. We talked about everything from him interviewing Hugh Hefner to, his relationship with his dad, to his marriage. I mean, it was to, him having almost dying. I mean, we all that in 1 hour. So pretty amazing. It
was a really interesting hour. I know I've listened to it a couple times already, and I feel like he just has such an interesting life and has just lived such an interesting and faithful life. And to think of all the people he's reaching, even the people he impacted this past weekend at our church, just really glad that we had that opportunity. Kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same.
But let's talk about that. So obviously we have another kind of different episode for people today. We're coming off of 2 big weekends, Lee Strobel and Easter. So we've had a lot going on here the past couple weeks. What have we seen God doing? How have we seen him moving? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, Spencer, I just want to introduce him as well. Many of our listeners will know him, Pastor Spencer, over our college and missions and so much more. It's funny, Spencer and I and others, I was talking to you about this as well, we were kind of having a conversation as a staff about the importance of catalytic events. We don't have tons of those throughout the year. Some are built in, Christmas Eve and Easter. We're going to be doing, which we'll talk about at some point, the Heights Conference this fall. That'll be a catalytic event. Yeah. But we saw so many people, both at Easter and at Lee Strobel come out. Yeah. And so we'll get into this, I think, today, but it's just the whole idea of there are certain come and see events. Yeah. I mean, Jesus did a lot of individual ministry, spent an enormous amount of time with the 12, but there is these big teaching moments. Yeah. There is the feeding of the 5,000. There are these catalytic events that we were really thinking that, we saw probably... easily over 1,000 more people come to, let's talk about Lee Strobel. Wow. We saw, over 1,000 more people than would normally come to a weekend service. We didn't add any more services, just 1,000, actually closer to 1,400 more people came. And really, we're excited about that because I guess part of how I view, especially Lee Strobel, if we're talking about it, I view it as and I'm grateful to do this as a church and as a pastor, it's a ministry primarily to our church, but it's also a ministry to our city. I mean, we were laughing. We saw church buses showing up at the Sunday night service. We heard stories of youth groups coming. We had a big group come from Asheboro. And so we know that some people, we're just going to bless them for the moment. But we also think, man, this is an event where I really believe let's just say, Spencer really said this, of the 1,000 people that come, we hope that maybe 100 of those, 10%, meaningfully take their next step spiritually. Hopefully, we think most of them might take them at Two Cities Church.
That's great. And I mean, we asked our people to invite those that are far from God and close to them.
Yes.
And man, not only did they invite them, but they showed up.
That's right.
So that was really cool to see. And really what today is about, and excited to get Spencer involved in the conversation here, we just want to give you a toolbox for what comes next. And I can't think of a better person to be sitting here today than the Spencer Martin, our pastor of college and missions, former and current. I guess you're always a launch team member. Once a launch team member, always.
That's right.
And Spencer, really, why I'm glad to have you here is not just because you're so knowledgeable about, like evangelism, which you are, which is important as a college and a missions pastor, but it's who you are as a person. I mean, Kyle, you can attest to this. Spencer not only talks the talk, he walks the walk, and he's been doing that from the very beginning. I would love to hear from you, Kyle, just a little bit about Spencer and what you remember of him.
Well, we talk all the time. We planted the church 7.5 years ago, and we had a huge launch team. And I always say, because it's pretty simple math, 30 moved, 70 met us, and Spencer was one of the 30 that moved. And it's always neat for me, Spencer's a great example of this. We see this again and again in our church. We're a young church with lots of young people. And so I've seen Spencer, brand new college grad. I've seen Spencer dating Olivia. I've seen, I did their premarital counseling. We've celebrated the birth of both of their kids. He's now full-time on staff after being a PA. He can tell some of that story.
Yeah.
And his wife helps part-time with the college ministry. And so he's now a pastor on our staff. So he's just he's like a picture of what we would love to see happen at different levels and layers. There's so many people. In fact, I want to say this real quick. I thought it was really interesting how much Lee talked about his church giving him opportunities to do more than just, and I don't want to belittle at all.
Yeah.
They just faithful volunteer at whatever level they're at.
Yeah.
But to continually be called up. And so for Spencer really started out doing volunteering in the college ministry to doing it part-time to, you and me sitting down at, what is that breakfast place called?
Arthur's.
You and me talking at Arthur's about, what would it look like for you to leave a career that you went to PA school for 2 years, you moved to Winston, yes, for our church plant, but for Wake Forest PA school. Tell us about that story of because that's so key. And I told Lee this. I think it's such a sign of health. There's like 5 or 10 of you on our staff that left not even just jobs, but careers. Tell us about that process for you.
Yeah, it was not an easy process at all.
Yes.
Because as you know, the PA profession tends to pay more than most ministerial professions.
Yes.
And so we definitely had to count the cost. And what it really came down to is I tell people all the time that I loved my career as a PA because sometimes people will leave their careers in medicine or therapy or whatever because they hate it.
Yeah.
But I was actually unique in that I loved working in gastroenterology, which surprises a lot of people.
There's a picture of some of it on your
wall. I do have a picture of the GI tract in my office. It's framed. It looks very nice. It reminds me of my former profession. But what it really came down to for me was I could see that the Lord had given me certain desires.
Yeah.
He had given me certain passions. He had given me certain gifts. And I wanted to give the first and the best of my time to ministry.
So good.
And so I just left a profession that I loved and stepped into full-time ministry. And it has been a very fun ride up to this point.
And how long ago was that?
It was almost 3 years ago.
Okay.
So it's been quite
It'll
a
be
while.
3 years in August, right? Or right around that? 3 years in July?
Yeah, 3 years in August.
Okay.
Well, and I think what's important for people to know, too, is that you were taking ministry serious even before you came on to full-time staff. I mean, I can remember... you were just over there reaching the PA school. There are so many PA school students coming around and so many that came to faith, got plugged into. You had a PA student only community group for a season, right? Can you talk about that season?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I was thinking as you were talking about the fact that we planted 7.5 years ago, I don't think that either of you know how I ended up with 2 cities. And it's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
Tell us.
So it was February of 2016. I had gotten into PA school in Virginia.
Oh, not here.
And no, not Wake. I was waitlisted at Wake Forest. And I went to an event at the Summit Church where David Platt and J.D. Greer were talking about whatever you do it well for the glory of God and do it somewhere strategic for the mission of God. And this event was on a Sunday night. And again, I had been waitlisted at Wake Forest.
Yeah.
And during the event, I felt convicted by my lack of prayerfulness about where I would be next year.
Wow.
I had gotten into a PA school in Virginia. I was like, okay, this will be great. But I went home that night and I prayed. I said, Lord, I want you to send me to Winston-Salem so that I can be a part of this church plant.
And so that I can meet Olivia Martin.
Monday afternoon, they called me and said that I got accepted to Wake's PA program. And so
So
I didn't know that story.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat story about how God was just waiting for me to ask. And I finally asked, and he was like, all right, great, I'll send you there. And so, yes, moved here in 2016. Like you said, met my wife, Olivia, here, which, fun fact, we hold the title of being the first couple to meet at 2 cities and get married.
And you may hold the title for matchmaking the most people.
This
at 2
is
cities.
true.
You
This
have
is
a big
true.
heart for that.
Yes,
What's your
and
record?
Do you have a heart for this?
I don't know that I would go as far to say I have a heart for this, but I would say that it is something that I enjoy doing. Sometimes people just need a little bit of help.
Yeah.
It's
That's
like,
right.
hey, this person seems like they're a godly young man. This seems like a godly young woman that may have potentially be interested in each other.
I don't know if you remember this, but you tried to set me up with your brother one time.
Did I actually?
You spoke about how old I was, and then you tried to set me up with your brother.
I think
because I was too old
I actually
for you,
am starting to remember this now. But the good side of this story is that I actually played a small role in you and your husband meeting each other.
That is true. He was like the in-between man with another person helping set us up. So
matchmaker.
Maybe not be married to
Martin.
Ben Wilson today if Spencer Martin hadn't come to Winston-Salem.
That's right.
Well, it's always interesting for me to think if we had not planted this church, most likely you would have never met Olivia. I mean, life's weird like that.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's just so weird because that's how you ended up meeting Olivia. She was going to OT school at Winston-Salem State.
Yep.
You guys moved here together.
Yes. It's interesting because we were both members of the launch team, but we did not meet until after Two Cities was launching or was having services. And so she was a greeter at the front door. Some of you have heard the story. And I was looking for someone's wife. And so she looked similar to this person I was looking for. I'd only met her like one time. And I walked up to her. I said, hey, are you so-and-so's wife? And Olivia said, no, I'm not married. And I said, oh. And then I found out that she wasn't married. And because I was head usher at the time, I had access to information about people who were serving. Looked up her number.
We don't encourage this on our
Looked
staff
up her number.
The advantages of serving.
Sent her a text message, and it ended up working out slowly but surely.
The rest is history.
The rest is history.
But anyway, to answer your question earlier, Kari, yes, we started a PA school Bible study. I ended up finding some classmates, many of which still go to this church and are meaningful members. Some of them are community group leaders right now. And we just started a small PA school Bible study, and it grew steadily over time, and we ended up inviting non-believers into the Bible study, and it was great.
And I think one of the cool things to see has been over the years that legacy of you being faithful there has just continued and grown as others have been faithful after you. We still have a really strong presence in the PA school because of some of the first fruits of your ministry and labor there early on. So thank you for that.
I think, Spencer, you're a good illustration example of something we've talked about. I don't know the last time I've talked about this publicly, but ministering out of your lifestyle and your life stage.
Yeah.
And I think, you like, what were you? You were a PA student. So therefore, who's going to be the people that you're going to live, learn, work, and play around? PA students. And then I'm sure if we got into Bible studies and what you did afterwards and how it incorporated, it was very much life stage, lifestyle. This is why ministry changes it's different when you're married. It's different when you have young kids. And every season you have to go, what life stage am I in? What lifestyle am I in? And then how do I minister out of that? Yes, I want to serve. Yes, I want to sacrifice. Yes, I'm willing to suffer. But my first thing is, what life stage and lifestyle can I minister out of? And that's really freeing for people. It's like, oh, you're a mom with 3 kids and you go to the park 3 times a week. Like, maybe that's a lifestyle and life stage you can minister out of.
When I can remember when I had my first conversation with you about the launch team, and I was so afraid of like taking a next step. Well, maybe is this God's will for me to move to Winston? Is it not? And I felt a lot of freedom in our conversation when you were like, well, there's some things that are clearly in God's will, and we are clearly all called to go and make disciples wherever we go.
Yes.
And so wherever we are, wherever we're planted, it's less about, okay, God, where are you taking me next?
Yes.
But how can you use me here and now?
Yes.
And I think a lot of people listening today may need to hear that. Like, you do not need to be in full-time ministry to be a minister of the gospel.
Yes.
God has given you an area of influence, and he wants you to be obedient in that before he gives you anything else to step into or to walk into.
Agree.
It's good.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're going to get started here. We've already talked about a lot of really good stuff, but and we're excited again for more and more people to come on, for us to get to know more of our elders and more of our staff team, more people in our church as things continue to grow larger. It really does make it feel smaller, and it is sweet for us, I think, to just kind of look back to how these lovely people came into our lives. But Kyle, I want you to take us back. Because as we think about this topic today, this idea of, okay, you invited people to these 2 big events that we had, Easter and Lee Strobel, and they came, and what do I do now? When we think about that, we can't talk about that personal evangelism without talking about the One Initiative.
Yes.
Kyle, can you just take us back to this past fall, to the One Initiative? What is it? What is One? What did it mean for the life of our church?
I'm guessing maybe many listening were not here yet for that since we've had so many new people recently. So the One Initiative was, there's these moments where I'm planning on doing something and I'm running it by the pastors, elders, and then every once in a while something just changes. And I can't remember every detail behind it, but I just felt like, man, we needed an initiative. I felt this going into our last building. Northwest Boulevard, which is now our student center. I felt this coming into this building, like, hey, we need a new emphasis on personal evangelism. So we did the Conversationalist. I'd be surprised if anyone remembers that. But it was walking through Jesus's conversations in the Gospel of John. We did that as we were moving into the other building.
Yeah.
So the one initiative, you really helped clarify, just like, let's call it something simple. Let's call it one. I think what we were trying to do is say the idea of the whole series was the gospel moves forward, one relationship and one gospel risk at a time. And I really think, like, whether you are a missionary in Afghanistan, whether you are a mom at the park, like I mentioned, whether you're a student on the college campus, whether you're a business guy in the business world, I think whether you're working with your kids, you're like, I think it's going to be one relationship. God works through relationships. God's relational, and it's going to be one gospel risk at a time. You know, I'm still wearing my wristband from that. You know, I see a lot of other people wearing it still. I mean, I think it was, you know, on a personal level, I think it was the best series we've ever done as a church. If I don't know how to, that's subjective and arbitrary, but
I would agree.
In just the sense, and we did some great series, Forward series. We've walked through Judges. We've walked through it, but in the sense
Even
of
this last series in Habakkuk, amazing.
Yeah. In the 7 letters, I mean, we've done a lot of different things, but I just felt like this. It was the type of series where I'm like, I think what we did with that is we took something as big as the Great Commission, and we made it very, very personal. And you know, I was just talking to some pastors about this. I mean, I think I want to just re-say this real quick. We're trying to make the Great Commission. We're trying to have it at 3 different levels, if you think about it. So when we think about the Great Commission for our church, I've not talked about this recently, but I need to talk about this again. We would love to see 10% of our church. 10% of our church growth be conversion growth. We know that people come from other cities and people come from other churches. We'd love to see people go from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. From mentors that have invested in me, they've said, hey, 10% is, you know, God can breathe and bless and Pentecost could happen. But if 10, so for example, you know, I think last year, these numbers are not probably exactly accurate, but last year I think we grew by 450 people. That would say, man, would 40 or 45 of those people be genuine new believers? So that's the goal of it as our church, so that we could put that in front of the whole church. Then I think the goal of the individual is, okay, we took something as big and complex as the Great Commission. And because I guess the fear is, my fear is people think they're missional because they're a part of our church.
Yeah.
This happens. I saw this at the summit. I love the summit. But people think, well, the summit sends lots of missionaries and does lots of church plants, and JD was a missionary for a couple of years, and I'm a part of that church, so I'm missional. Well, they may not be missional. They may be. So we've said, hey, who's that one person who's far from God, close to you? I use that language because it's very emotional. I'm not trying to manipulate, but it makes people think. The third thing we've done is to try to say, and again, I've not done the best job keeping this in front of people, but we've tried to say, what if every community group saw one person in their network of relationships come to Christ and be baptized? So what we try to do is we try to say at the corporate level, 10%. At the individual level, 1 person. And at the group level, could we see 1 baptism? And I think that takes it, you know, so much of what we talk about is like ethereal and what are we going to do? And we try to bring it down. So that's how I'd summarize how we're trying to be missional as a church. I think it'd be good, and I'll let Spencer speak to some things if you've got some questions, but maybe we can talk for a few minutes about the tension in churches being both attractional and missional, having both a come and see and a go and tell mentality, because I think you'll see churches that have one or the other, and we're certainly better at one than the other, and we're trying to grow in both. But and what happens a lot of times at a time like Easter is you had a lot of people who we hope were doing the go and tell, they had the relationships, they made the proverbial deposits, and then they could do the come and see withdrawal. Of the relationship. Yeah,
I definitely want to talk about that, but I think I want to jump back for a second, and I'd be curious to hear from Spencer on this, because I think one of the things that we realized, right, when I think about this, we were sitting in a room with several people talking about the next series. It was going to be Hebrews, and then you're like, no, right. I think it needs to be Acts. And in one conversation with like 6 or 7 weeks to go, we were like, we think this needs to be an evangelism initiative, partially because the majority of us, everyone sitting here in this room today, got to be a part of a thriving college ministry where we were taught how to share our faith, how to form relationships with people who are not believers, how to share our personal testimony, like these things that come so intrinsically to us. We realized a lot of people in our church don't have that training or background. Spencer, can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think that one of the things that the One Initiative did was show the everyday member of our church, hey, when it comes to the Great Commission, you can play a role in this.
That's right.
It is very doable for you. Just pick one person who's far from God but close to you that you can try to build a relationship with and be strategic in sharing the gospel with them. I think about my own life, my own one. I can remember before the One Initiative, I feel like I would see this guy once every couple of weeks. But I don't know if this was true or not, but once we started the One Initiative, it felt like I was seeing him 2 to 3 times per week.
Yeah.
And during the initiative, and even since the initiative, whenever I see him, I feel a strong tug. It's like, that's your one. It's like, are you going to just keep doing whatever you're going to do, or are you going to try to go and have a meaningful conversation with him?
That's good.
And so I think that one of the best things that the One Initiative did was just show our people, say, hey, you can be a part of the Great Commission.
That's good.
You have these relationships right now, and so why don't you just maximize the opportunities that the Lord is giving you? And so I think that was a very special part of the initiative.
And I've had at least 2 that I can think of right now, 2 people come up to me since the initiative telling me that their one has come to Christ, which is super encouraging.
Exciting.
And I've had many people say to me over the times, my one's coming next week, my one's coming this week.
Yeah.
I met with my one this week. And so even having, some of it's having the right language.
I think so.
And so I think I told the story before, but we were at a church at 1122. It's an influential church in Jacksonville.
Who we kind of stole the idea of one from.
Yeah. I mean, we use a little bit different language, but they talk about their one. And one of the interesting things is when I was down there, I don't think I told this story during the series, but the staff know the story. But basically, when I was down there, everybody that I was around was talking about their one in such natural and normal ways that I thought, man, what would it be like to create a church where that was, yes, part of the culture is, who are you praying for? And part of the culture is, what are you reading in your Bible and all that kind of stuff. What are you repenting of? All those are great questions. But to have that missional mindset where you're just talking about your one.
No, and I think I've seen it in our community groups, but also on a staff level. We have a huddle every Monday morning where we celebrate what we see, what God is doing. And our staff, they are talking more about their ones and about what God is doing in those relationships. In our community groups, I mean, every week, I don't know about yours, but every week in mine, someone has something to say about, I had this great conversation with my one, or would you pray? I'm going to be meeting up with my one later in the week. And obviously they're using a name and not saying one all the time. Yeah. But the point is, it's in front of people and it's changing people's perspectives on who should be doing the Great Commission. It's like, okay, I'm a part of this. And I think that's been really cool.
And just another example of the ripple effects of the One Initiative was within the last few weeks, I was talking with 2 ladies, and one of them shared a prayer need with me, and we had a moment to pray together. And then right when we sort of wrapped up the conversation, the woman who shared the prayer need walked away, and the other woman sort of lingered there for a second, and she said, "That's my one."
Yes.
That's
the lady who had just shared the prayer.
That's so awesome.
And so seeing little things like that happen are just so encouraging when we think about the effect that the One series had on our church.
It really is. And so obviously when we reach out to our one, it just can't stop there. It can't just be one conversation. It's a continual relationship with the hope of eventually that they would come into, like you were talking about, Kyle, the environment of the church and come and see what we're getting to celebrate every single weekend. Can you just speak to that a little bit? Why is it important that people actually come into the church environment?
Yeah, well, this things for me are getting more high resolution. As I'm teaching things, I'm learning new things. One of the advantages of teaching, I was doing 4 times a week, the same sermon, now 3 times. But as I'm teaching something, as I'm sharing it at different levels, hopefully my thinking on it becomes more high resolution. And as I've thought about this, if I could redo the One Initiative, I think my phrase, one relationship at a time, one risk at a time, what I've kind of added to it. And I really felt this when we got in our new building. I looked around at the room that our church, through their generosity, was able to build. And I just thought, the gospel goes through not just one relationship and one risk at a time, but often one room at a time. Yeah. And I don't just mean the church room. Sometimes it's like it's the dorm room, it's the dining room table room, it's the community group room. And so I think, you have relationships and you invest in them, and then you bring them to, and I'm using this term elastically, you bring them to different rooms. And so part of what I was mentioning a little earlier is the tension might be the right word, the symbiotic relationship between come and see and go and tell. If you oversimplify it, you could probably say the Old Testament is much more come and see. God says, dress this certain way and live in this certain location and have all these dress and diet and all that kind of stuff you do. And you're going to be a kingdom of priests and a witness to the world, and they're going to come from all over, like the Queen of Sheba, and they're going to, is that what her name was? Who visited? What was the lady who visited Solomon?
Who knows?
Sure.
I think it was the Queen of Sheba. Anyway,
you can fact check us.
Yeah, fact check me on that. Anyway, the Queen comes, visits, and that's kind of the Old Testament model. I'm oversimplifying it. Obviously, Abraham goes out, but it's a lot of come and see. And I think we see the New Testament model, especially when the church is very, very early. This is the early church. I mean, we don't even have any. One of the reasons people debate, infant baptism and all sorts of stuff is like we have so little information about the early church and how it grew and what happened and how So what you see in the New Testament is you see a lot of going and telling. You see no buildings. They don't have any buildings. They go to the marketplace. They go to they go to the synagogue if they're allowed. So I think there's this tension between go and tell, come and see. I think that most people are going to have a lot of relationships where they've gone and go and tell. And then I think what you do is you wait for that right moment to say, come and see. And usually that moment for somebody, I hate to say it, but this is how it usually works, is when something's not going well in their life. And then that's the moment to say, come and see. So we're trying to have, if I can say one more thing about this, we're trying to have both to use different language, but similar idea, an attractional church and a missional church. And you normally see churches be on one extreme. I'm not acting like we found the perfect middle. But the attractional church is a church that, among other things, knows how to really do the weekend well. And the sermon is, hopefully helpful and intelligible to people. The music speaks the heart language and style of the people. There's the right use of technology and video. People feel welcomed, and it's all that kind of stuff. And then the missional element is hey, we go out. And so sometimes what you'll have is a church that has all hey, it's only attractional, and there's not much happening during the week. A lot of times you'll have churches that are the pastor's bivocational. This isn't a bad thing. I'm saying the pastor's bivocational. It's a neighborhood church. They're just trying to reach their neighborhood. They don't even really trying to start with any Christians. And you have a lot of go and tell, but you don't have much come and see. And there's just a lot of tension. There's a lot of I could go on about this. There's how much time, energy do you put into each of those? How much time do you put into your worship service? I think about this as a staff person. I think about this versus how much time do you put into equipping people throughout the week to do all the things they need to do. So I don't know if that makes sense.
By God's grace, I feel like He's helped our church to be a church that is balancing the tension of those things really well. I mean, for a long time we talked about like how you can belong before you believe. We and uniquely right now, I feel like we're seeing even more and more people that have not been in church for a long time or don't even have a relationship with Christ actually really coming through our church doors and feeling like it's a place that they can belong and a place where they can learn and a place where they can seek. But even early on, I think back to the days at Goler, I can remember so many people who they didn't have a relationship with the Lord yet, but they were curious and they came and they were plugged into our community groups and into our weekly service, into our serving team. Spencer, you're nodding your head. Speak to this,
please.
Yes.
I love how you said that people often belong before they believe, because this is actually a very biblical idea. I believe it's in Acts chapter 17.
Okay.
The Apostle Paul is talking to a group of people, and then after he talks with them, it says that he got 3 responses. It says that some mocked him. It said some said, we will hear you more about this, or we'll come around, we'll listen to what you got to say.
Good.
And then the third response that he got, it says some joined him and then believed. It didn't say believed and then joined him.
That's good.
And so that's often what happens in college ministry, for example. What we see all the time is that a student is much more likely to join themselves to a friend group that happens to be Christians, start coming to our gatherings, start coming to church, things like that.
Yes.
They join themselves to Christians, and then they come to believe. And so as you were talking about, I think that we as the church, as Christians, we need to live in the tension of going out, being missional, sharing the gospel, and also come and see.
Yeah.
I tell college students all the time that asking someone to come with you to church is very low-hanging fruit.
It really is.
The worst thing they can do is just say no. And so obviously all of us need to try to be proactive. We need to try to share the gospel, of course. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that for whatever reason, could you at least ask your roommate, ask your suite mate, ask your coworker, hey, you want to come with me to church this weekend and just see what happens?
Statistics are in your favor. I mean, the last time I looked, like 2/3 of people, if they were asked by a friend or a family member or a neighbor, will actually say yes to a church invitation. Those are encouraging numbers. And, as you were talking about all this too, I just keep thinking about how we're called to have the aroma of Christ. And the only way that the non-believer gets to see that aroma of Christ is if they're in environments. A lot of times when we're together, they can see that independently, one-on-one, some through the ways that we treat them in relationships. But when they get to come around groups of believers and see how we engage and just that aroma of Christ around a whole group of people, it's a lot more obvious. You want to speak to that for a second?
No, I completely agree. I mean, I don't know that I have anything too profound to say about that. But yeah, I mean, I think people need to, again, so much of Christianity, it's like people have no idea what it is. They've never seen it lived out. You know, we know this all the time. People have never seen a godly marriage. People have never seen a godly family. People have never seen, relationships that were genuine and transparent. And again, it depends on where they grew up and what they've experienced. And so a lot of times people come into, whether it's a home, a Christian home for the first time, a Christian college ministry, a Christian friend group, and it's the attractive nature of Christianity,
Yeah.
And I think that people are drawn toward the church or Christian groups of people when they really are distinct and different from the world. I've heard that from you, Kyle. One of my favorite things to see, and I've seen this recently, is someone who is not a Christian. They show up at church one week.
Yes.
And then I love to watch people who I know are not Christians and just observe how they're behaving. Sometimes, like I can think of a college student over the last year or so where this student is not singing at church. If you look at him, it does not look like he's happy to be here, but he keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And he keeps coming back and he keeps coming back. And I think the reason that is because by the grace of God, our church is distinct and different from the world. It's distinct and different from all the other environments that he's exposed to on his campus or elsewhere.
Yeah, sometimes we don't realize how different it is. If you've been a Christian for a while coming around, I remember I've told stories sometimes, but I was doing some ministry at Duke. This was years ago, and I cashed in. John Piper was speaking at Southeastern Seminary. I was in Durham. It was about an hour drive. And I had like 3 or 4 guys I had invested. They were lost as you could be, fraternity guys. But I told them about John Piper. I said, this is one of the greatest Christian speakers in the world, blah, blah, blah. I get them to come. I remember this. We go to breakfast. We drive an hour. I take them to Southeastern. They really still probably had no idea how big of a deal it is to get to hear John Piper. Anyway, so they hear John Piper. It's an intense message. But we get in the car, and I'm expecting them to talk about John Piper's message. And the first thing they said to me was, man, those songs that we sang were intense. And I was like, dude, I didn't even... And it's not like we sang the blood of Jesus. I don't know what we sang that day, but it was... Maybe that was part. We didn't sing nothing but the blood. Is what I'm trying to say. That's a song that if you've never been to church for, you're like, what's this about? But I just think we forget that this is. I remember the first time I was invited to a room. Okay, so my friend Joe Dutko had a relationship. He invited me to a room, which was 220. It was a youth group, and I remember watching people worship for the first time, close their eyes, lift their hands. I felt uncomfortable. I had never seen that. As a growing up Catholic, I had never experienced anything like it. Worship was very formal. It was very, very, non-expressive. And but at the same time, it was attractive to me. And I think that's what we have to. And hopefully, we're trying to create a church like this. We're trying to be biblical. And so people feel like, man, this is the type of church I could bring my lost friends to, and that they're going to, I think it was JD who said, there's nothing more attractive than a man on fire preaching the gospel. There's nothing more attractive than the church worshiping together. There's nothing more attractive than people, celebrating their faith in Christ through water baptism like we did at Easter. And we just forget that those things are unbelievably attractive to the world, and we need to get them. God uses His Word, His Spirit, and His people. That's what He uses. Yep. And I think there's something unique that happens. I can't fully describe it or explain it when the church gathers.
Absolutely.
That uniquely His Word and His Spirit and His people are working together. I felt that the other day. We're singing, Lee Strobel looking around. I'm like, this whole, even the 5 o'clock service was completely packed. I'm like, this is a picture of heaven right here.
Yeah. No, that's so good. Looking at some of the statistics from Barna earlier this week, and it's like 71% of people view Jesus positively and want the things He has to offer, like peace, hope, and purpose.
Yes.
That's a large number of people, much more people than we're seeing on our churches on Sundays. And so a lot of it is, what are we doing as followers of Christ, as the only image of Christ that some of these people may ever see in a person? Like, what are we doing to help people be attracted to the local church and the true Jesus, not just the Jesus that can give them these things, but the Jesus that can actually give them an entirely new life? I don't know. That number just struck me. It's like they're out there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, I'm thinking about we mentioned him a couple times on the podcast. My friend Andy, who passed, all of our friend Andy, who passed. I think one thing he did so well that made the church attractive. He was a business guy, and he made a commitment that if he was doing something with the church, he was telling his business partners. Yeah. If he sometimes he'd be coming to community group late, and he's like, sorry, I was at this dinner. He's like, and I told them, I said, guys, I love my community group, and I'm sorry, I got to head out early. And I'm like, man, that is so attractive because so many people think of the church as something you have to do. So I think without faking it, but as much as people can explain the I get to, I'm excited about something. I mean, I've always loved, we've never done this as a church. I've always loved the I love my church shirts. They're just they're just so simple and beautiful. It's like, my pastor, my old pastor, this is back when I was in college. He had this car, and I'm not a big fan of bumper stickers, but he had a bumper sticker on the back of his car that just said, I love my wife. And it was just so, sweet in a culture where everyone's like, the old ball and chain, or we put up with each other. And it's like, this guy puts a bumper sticker on the back of his car that says, I love my wife. So I feel that when I see somebody put, I love my church, not I go to this church, I have to go to this church, my parents go to this church. So, Spencer, for you, as you think about the college campus, and I don't know how much you can get into this, and if you can't, that's fine. But, we've thought a lot about how important the come and see is on the college campus. You've tried to do so much so that we've even realized, wait, we need to put a come and see not just at our church building on Sundays, which we're glad to do, but you're doing things on the campus that are growing as a time to come and see, especially at Wake Forest. Can you talk a little bit about that?
One of the things we're trying to do is we are trying to figure out how to wrap our arms around as many college students as possible. And so what we end up having to do is we have to create multiple environments that college students may find attractive. And so we do a couple of different things. Sometimes we will have just attractional events here at the church. And so we will sometimes have Chick-fil-A and trivia here at our church. And the reason behind that is we want to just give people the chance to come, have a good experience in a church building in a way that's not awkward. Yes, free food, crumble cookies, all that kind of stuff. And so we do these things that are just fun, not because we're afraid to just do things that are very much Bible saturated, but we want to give people a good experience with church. And so we'll do attractional events like that, but then we will also go to the students, like at Wake Forest University, for example, and we will have worship nights there where maybe it's a Wednesday night at 8 p.m. On campus. We'll sing 5 or 6 songs. We'll have somebody share their testimony. We'll share a brief message. And what we found is that there are a lot of students who will not come to our church as their first step, but they will be very interested in just walking 500 yards from where they were studying to where we're having our worship night. And because they have a good experience at our worship night, whether it be they enjoyed the songs or they enjoyed the teaching or they just really enjoyed building the relationship with the person that brought them, we see that they're way more likely to come to church. And so I think the principle is we need to be thinking about these 3 questions. I've been beating this drum with college students
Let's hear it.
all semester. 3 questions that you can ask for pretty much any person you know. Where are you spiritually? Second question, why are you there? Third question is this, what is your next step?
I love it.
And here's why I love that question. Every single person that you know can answer those questions. So for example, a new Christian or a non-Christian, where are you? Okay, I'm not saved. My life is not going well. Why are you there? Well, we can talk about that. What's your next step? Well, maybe my next step is I need to get into some better rhythms. Maybe I need to start going to the church. Great. Let's go to the opposite side of the spectrum. Lee Strobel. If we were to ask him those questions last week, he would have had an answer, despite the fact that he's been walking with the Lord for 40 years.
That's good.
He would still have a next step spiritually. And so as Christians, part of evangelism, part of discipleship is to always be thinking through the question of where is this person? Why are they there? And probably most importantly, what is their next step?
What I love about this is that you're allowing that person to answer that question. And sure, they may need some help and guidance and direction in that, but it's not you pointing a finger in their face and saying, you're lost and this is the next step you need to take. It's you saying, hey, like, as you look at yourself, where are you? Where do you want to be? Let's talk about how you can get there. And I feel like that is such a nice, like, relational element there of, like, we're coming together. I want you to want to do this for you.
Yes.
And we're going to help you get there. Well, for a lot of people, we have gotten them to the church building, right? They've invited their friends, and they came, and they showed up. And they're really wondering, okay, what do I want? What do I do next? And that was a really good example right there of some conversations that you could have that you shared. But I'm just curious, what are some helpful tips or tricks you guys may have for how do we continue the conversation once we've seen a friend come to church with us?
I can start. I mean, I think 2 thoughts come to my mind immediately. One is what resources can I give them that would be helpful? And you have to get creative with this.
Yeah.
When I was doing college ministry, especially at UNCG, I would introduce guys who are spiritually interested, spiritually curious, whatever you want to call it, seekers. I would introduce them to Christian rap. Partly just like we'd laugh. At first they'd laugh.
Who's your favorite Christian rapper?
That's a great question.
It's changed back in 116. Do you remember them? Like that was a whole group.
It
That
was like
was
Lecrae's thing, yeah.
Yeah. That when it first started. Then I mean, probably Lecrae. I mean, he's had his ups and downs, but I think The Truth was another guy that I've listened to.
I don't even know who that is.
Oh yeah. So, but I would give them
maybe some Forrest Frank these days.
There you go. And
I'm a Tripoli fan personally.
I love Tripoli. Tripoli's good. That whole crew. So basically, what we would laugh. They'd laugh. Oh, Christian rap. That sounds goofy. Then you'd play it from like, whoa, and then you don't realize like these lyrics are deep. So that like sometimes I heard a guy one time. He said, "Man, I'm reaching out to my friend. He's kind of a lost business guy, but he's interested." And I don't know the name of this or who wrote this book or whatever, or if it's even that great of a book. But he goes, "Man, there's a book called The Mulligan." And it's a mulligan is basically if you play golf. I don't know a lot about sports, but I know about golf. The mulligan is like you're on the first tee and you hit it out of bounds and you just go, all right, I'm taking a mulligan, which means I'm basically going to not count that shot. I'm going to put another ball. I get to start over. And I just thought, wow. And then never read the book. I thought for a business guy who plays a lot of golf, who's not having a great life, a book called The Mulligan might be what might be it for him. So sometimes it's, hey man, you're struggling on parenting. Here's a parenting book from a Christian perspective. So there's the resource.
That's
and
really
you've got to
interesting.
get creative. And we live in the golden age of Christian publishing. I mean, there's something for everyone. So that's what. Sometimes it's a video clip. Hey, you've got a lot of questions. Here's a William Lane Craig, question thing. I can't sit with you for 4 hours and talk about this, but here's a video.
Well, I think about Kyle, like the reason why we shoot so many testimony videos, it's not just for the people in our church to see it and hear. We find people that aren't following Christ responding to them a lot of the time. We hear stories about that where people are like, hey, can you send me that clip so I can send it to my friend and they can watch it?
Yes.
Like we value that medium of video because of how it can speak to people in just a different way.
No, I agree. And the other one I think is, and then I'll let Spencer if he's got any other ones to add, is what we've called in the past one-to-one Bible reading. That I took that phrase from a book by David Helm, Helm, David Helm. It's a very short book called One-to-One Bible Reading. And he basically says that you can basically choose a book of the Bible. And he has recommendations. Is it a new believer or maybe someone a seeker skeptic? Maybe you do something short like Colossians, or something. Or you can do one of the Gospels, Mark or Luke or John, and you just get together. And the whole idea is, hey, I promise I'm not going to try to. This is what you'd say to the person. I'm not going to try to study this to teach you. Like this is not. If that's what you want, we could do that. But this is actually we're both just going to show up, read a chapter, and we're gonna. I think he's got lightning bulb question mark arrow. So what jumps out to me? It's really observation, interpretation, application. Yeah. And so I would say, and the other thing that and I don't know how I feel about this. I'm still kind of processing this. But I was recently had a chance to be with Larry Osborne, who we've talked about before. He's written a lot of books that have influenced our church. I was with him in February, and he was kind of saying, and I can't remember all his language, but he said, and he was going down it. He said, you've got the believers, and then he said, you've got the seekers. And then he said, you've got kind of the skeptic, and then he said, you've got the hostile, and then you've got the enemy. And he was kind of going like farther away. And he said, really, guys, at the end of the day, we're trying to reach the seeker right now. Yeah. Like there is the story where you meet the skeptic, and he's, Anyway, I even addressed the skeptic at Easter. But what I'm trying to say is I think sometimes what we're doing is we're like, God, where are you? The old Henry Blackaby, who just passed away, his old principle, God, where are you at work? And how can I join you? We used to say in college ministry when I was with Campus Outreach, we don't create spiritual interest, we discover it.
That's
and you discover it by indiscriminately preaching the gospel to people. And then you're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this person was interested. And it's the law of large numbers. The more people you share Christ with and have spiritual conversation with, the more you see people who are spiritually interested and seeking and coming to Christ. And so that's I think what we're looking at. And I think the Bible reading, it might work with a skeptic. Yeah. But it really is for those people who are in the seeking stage and they maybe they don't know if Christianity is true, but they wish it was true. So what would you add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, I think that you are talking about the importance of being awake and alert to the spiritual interest of those around you.
That's it.
And so one of the things that I love to do is I try to figure out where is this person spiritually, what resource may they benefit from. And so if someone is just naturally skeptical, maybe they're not a Christian, maybe they've got a lot of questions, they're asking about why does a good God allow suffering? Has science disproved Christianity? Things of that nature. I'll give them a copy of Tim Keller's
Yes.
The Reason for God.
I've done that so
but then
many
maybe other
times.
people are just wanting to just have a simple understanding of the central truths of Christianity. Maybe I give them Gospel by J.D. Greer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maybe this
Yep.
person is very intellectual and they just
That's
want to know
really
more about the
good.
nature and character of God. I give them Knowing God by J.I. Packer.
Yep.
Maybe they're just
Yeah.
wanting a daily devotional because they're feeling anxious and they're feeling overwhelmed and they just want to know more about God. It's like, well, okay, here, New Morning Mercies by Bill
Yes.
David Tripp.
Yep.
And so I think that to summarize what you were talking about is we just need to be awake and alert to
think
the
so.
spiritual interests of those who are around us. And then, like I said earlier, give them a next step.
Yeah, it's taking them on a journey. I mean, I can remember there was a girl early on. I actually met her at a weekender, and the first question she had for me was like about the resurrection. It became really, really clear really quickly that she was not a believer. And I was like, you know what? What if we get together and we can talk a little bit more about the resurrection? Found like a really great, easy to read, quick read article that went through all these proofs of the resurrection, and we talked through that. And after that, she's like, I'm still not sure that I believe this, but this is really interesting. I want to know more. So I was like, okay, great. Let's read Tim Keller's The Reason for God together. And we read that together. And halfway through that, we'd read a chapter at a time and talk about it. It's like, hey, would you be open to also reading a chapter from Mark at the same time and
yep.
talking about that? And so we didn't use lightning bolt question. Light bulb.
Light bulb.
You said
I said lightning.
bolt
Sorry,
earlier.
light bulb. You're right.
We didn't use that. We use the sword method, which is really simple. And I
Yep.
think it teaches people how to read the Bible. What does this say about God or Christ? What does this say about man? Is there an example to follow, a command to obey, a promise to claim? And we just went through Mark and we read through that book. And over the course of that time, it was an instant. It was a long journey. But eventually she came to Christ. And it's a long game. And
Yeah.
I think that's important to remember too. Can you guys speak to that?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think that when we are thinking about how to engage those around us who are not Christians, we have to think, what is the best long-term strategy? For example, something that I encounter all the time doing college ministry is I have students who disappoint me or who I invite them to come to something, but they don't come, or I want them to be a part of something, but they're not for one reason or another. And I have to ask myself, okay, short term, I may be more likely to get them to come to this thing next week if I guilt them.
Yeah.
Or if I just, I guess you're not having the right priorities. It's like, that's one approach. But the best long-term strategy is we need to just be a very long-suffering people.
Yeah, that's
We
a
need
good
to be
word.
gracious. We need to be gracious. And then we need to be gracious again. With the understanding that as we continue to build a relationship over time, people may be in a different season in the future and be willing to take the next step that we want them to take.
That's right.
That's such a good
That's good.
word. That's such a good word. When we think about that, a lot of times we're not even nervous about like how do we get them to the next step. It's like actually how do we even start the conversation, even if they've already come to church with us. The idea of like bringing back up a spiritual conversation can be hard for people. I was just curious if you guys could speak to a little bit of what kind of tips you have for kind of launching into spiritual conversations. That continuum, right, that we talk about of casual to meaningful to spiritual.
Yeah. I mean, that's my paradigm. I mean, I don't know if Spencer may have better tips and tricks and techniques, but
We'll hear him here in a minute.
we'll hear him in a second. But no, I mean, I think becoming a good question asker is the key. I mean, finding those meaningful questions. An elder at my old church used to say that, I can't remember what they were, but he had, 10 or 15 questions that, if asked sincerely and honestly, like you don't have an agenda and you want to know, might be pathways into that. Something
good.
about how's your marriage going, or you find out something's going on with their kid, and then you can say, well, I love what you said. It's like earlier you were talking about, well, why are you there? Why do you think that's happening? What would you like to happen? So I don't know that it is hard. It is hard to go. We're used to the, to use the cliche, how's the weather? And are you surprised at who's winning in the,
hard to take
NCAA
it
bracket?
deeper.
It's like, some people just won't let you go there, and unfortunately. But a lot of people, I think, are longing for that.
My favorite questions to ask to go from casual to meaningful is, tell me about your family. When you ask someone to talk about their family, if they have a great relationship, they'll tell you about it. If they don't have a great relationship, they'll probably tell you about it. And so tell me about your family. Here's one that will really tell you a lot of information. Tell me about your relationship with your dad.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
For,
I mean, he
for
was
better
even
or
talking
for
about
worse,
that Lee was last
it
week.
will often unlock that person to you. You will understand things about them that you have been wondering and
That
wondering
is
and wondering.
true.
as they talk about their relationship with their dad. And so that's my favorite questions to ask, to go to casual from meaningful. To go from meaningful to spiritual, my favorite question to ask is, did you grow up in any kind of church?
Yes.
What was your experience like? Because when you ask someone that question, here's what they never say. They never just say, no, and then stop talking. Or yes, and then stop. They'll say yes, and then they'll just start talking and talking and talking. And then once they start doing that, I always encourage people to just try to find common ground, regardless of what they share about their church
Build a
experience.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Maybe they had a negative experience. Okay, well, did you have a negative experience with the church at any point? Maybe you can share that with them, build common ground. Maybe they've had great experiences. Great. Hey, let me just tell you about the experience that I've had at my church and how it's been great in my life and in my family's life. And so casual, meaningful, spiritual, you're right. It is a wonderful tool.
It's
it really
a helpful
is.
paradigm.
It's helpful for me to think through. And honestly, I think it's good for all of us because at the end of the day, it's not a strategy. We're not playing some game with our friends and our non-believers. We genuinely care about them and we want to get to know them. And if you want to have a genuine relationship with another human being, you need to ask them meaningful questions.
Yes.
And then the next extension of that is if we believe what we say we believe, then we better be taking that conversation somewhere spiritual. And so I think that's important to say. The last thing you want your friend that's far from God and close to you to think is that you are I am some kind of project to them. That is not the point. And I want to say that. Like, that's one thing that a lot of times with my friends who are non-believers, I'll make it very clear when we're having these spiritual conversations. Hey, no matter what you decide, like, I'm your friend. I'm here for you. And I think that's really important for them to hear and to know. There are some really bad ways we can go about having spiritual conversations.
That's right. I think, again, going back to my college ministry days, which were so formative, we used to talk about, and again, I don't want to get wooden like you're saying or put a formula with this. We used to categorize it, have we had the spiritual conversation, a spiritual conversation? That could be any of the things you just talked about. Second question was, have we shared our testimony? And that can be connected
That's
as well.
good.
That you said, I love that. That's well, thank you for sharing. I asked you about your spiritual background. If you have any type of social skills, you'll probably ask me. And so then testimony. And then the third is, okay, actually there's 4 parts. Third, have I shared with them anything from Scripture?
That's good.
So it may be, man, what you said reminded me of the story of the prodigal son, or something like that.
Good.
And then the fourth is, have I actually been able to clearly explain the gospel? And that for us was, we'd always say, my transition to that was, do you feel like you know the main message of the Bible? And most people would say no. Or I'd say, what do you think it is? And they'd say, be a good person or follow Jesus or be his example, be an example like him. And I said that, I'd always try to affirm what I could affirm. Well, that makes, I can understand why you think that. I bet if you wouldn't mind, I actually have a diagram I draw. Could I share with you in 3 to 5 minutes, just so you know the main message of the Bible? And so I think those 4 things, have I had a spiritual conversation? That's step 1. Have I been able? And it's not. You may share your testimony before you have a spiritual conversation. Don't get wooden with it. But I think the spiritual conversation into the testimony, into the have we taught at all about Scripture? To have I had the opportunity to share about the life, death, and resurrection of Christ and how significant that is for our lives and eternities.
And I know I keep bringing up Barna, but I mean, their stats prove exactly what you're just saying. The majority of people would rather hear be approached about spirituality and Christianity, 1, through you asking them questions about their journey, 2, through you sharing your own personal story, and then that continuum from there. So 100%. There's a pattern to that.
And I think part of it is, maybe more skeptics, but in general, I think the world looks at Christians as those who think they have all the answers. And so I think we need to lead with the questions because we don't have all the answers. We have some answers that we understand as revealed by God in Scripture.
That's good.
But I think the humility of being a question asker and saying, man, there's probably a lot I could learn from your, you're a Mormon? Oh, you've got a background in being
curious.
a
Jesus
Lutheran? I don't even, if someone says I'm Lutheran, I'm like, I don't know. This is embarrassing. I'm a pastor, but I don't know much about Luther. Yeah. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. When we were in Puerto Rico recently with our spring break mission trip team, we were going out and doing initiative evangelism. And the night before we did this for the first time, I sat down with the team. There was 33 of us. And I told them, I said, guys, is it daunting and intimidating to just start spiritual conversations?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Here's what I want to just encourage you with. The baseline goal for you when you do evangelism is, hey, would you just go out, ask some good questions.
That's great.
And learn something.
That's right.
Because I think that sometimes we have this scary idea in our mind of what it's going to be like to have this spiritual conversation. And yes, we certainly should have a sense of urgency to share our testimony, to share the gospel. But at the same time, I think at the end of the day, if you just learn something, that's great. If you have a meaningful conversation, that's fantastic. My wife Olivia and I, for example, when we get dinner or some kind of meal with non-believers, if it's the first time we're meeting up with them, we will say before we go meet with them, all right, here's the goal tonight. We want to go from casual to meaningful. And if we get to meaningful,
That's great.
I
love that you just
we would
state that.
we would love to get to spiritual, and that is certainly the goal. But if all we do in this 2-hour dinner is having meaningful conversation, we're going to celebrate, and then we're going to try to follow up again, have another relationship.
That's really good. I think, one of the things that's been around in our church for a while that we've stolen again from somewhere else is this idea of bless. Begin with prayer, listen with care, eat together, share your story, share the story.
Serve.
That's right. Serve is another one of them. I guess the stories are
the
together.
Share is last, serve is, but you're right. You're exactly right.
Yeah, and I think, so it starts with trusting in the Lord and relying on Him and going to Him in prayer. And then it's like, hey, how are we a good neighbor? Like Jesus tells us to love our neighbors. We have to be good neighbors to love our neighbors.
Yes.
Are we asking them questions? Are we trying to serve them in unique ways? Maybe their trash can's not pulled up to the top and it's trash day and we just pull that up, right? Or their lawn, they've had a busy week and they can't get around to mowing their lawn, whatever that is. Just being helpful, good people, good neighbors, I think is a lot of times a good start.
Yeah, I mean, you can. Benjamin Franklin, I think he said if he moved into someone next door to somebody, he would go over and he would ask them for a cup of sugar. It's like this famous, I can't remember all the details of it, but it's like some famous story of there's even something powerful about asking somebody to serve you in an appropriate way, because what you're creating is a reciprocal relationship, which is what people love. It's like, oh, I did something for you. I'll be much more likely to ask you to do something for me.
Yeah.
So I think there's wisdom in that. I think there's, I know we've got to close up soon, but I think we talked about, which I agreed with what you guys said about, people belonging and then believing. I think also, and this is part of that blessed principle, sometimes we need to belong so that we can bless other people. One of the challenges, especially this is maybe unique for us in full-time Christian ministry, the temptation is for us to go, well, our workplace is all Christians, and and with my community group and all my relationships, and so the whole question was, do you belong anywhere outside of the church? And so for me, I'll give you an example. It might be the YMCA when I'm exercising there, working out there. It might be in the summers. It will certainly be my pool that my family's a member at. I think for a lot of people, as their kids age, right now it's going to be the kids teams that my kids are playing on and the parents there. And so obviously my neighborhood, if I'm going to be a good neighbor. So you start realizing, okay, I can't belong everywhere. And that's the life stage lifestyle we talked about. But where do I belong outside of the church where it's going to be obvious that I can bless people, and then have the spiritual, all we've talked about, the casual, meaningful spiritual conversations.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think just to go back to what you both were saying earlier, a lot of times it's where you're already at. It is your street or your kid's school or wherever it is that the Lord, at your job, most people that are listening to this aren't in ministry. You have a workplace where every week you're spending more time with the people at your workplace than you are your own family. Those are fields that the Lord sees a rich harvest in, and Amen. He wants us to go out into that, and a lot of that is just showing up and being available. As we close, could you guys just speak a little bit to this idea? We've talked a lot about what we can do, but ultimately, what's our hope? What is the Holy Spirit doing? What is He doing in Winston-Salem?
I mean, that's the hard thing about ministry. I think John Piper said this, is ministry or mission, we could say, is doing what only God can do, And so, like I said, I don't know if I had to say it any better than we don't create spiritual interest as much as we discover it by having spiritual conversations and indiscriminately preaching the gospel. I think I remember, I was at a training. I was on college ministry staff, and we had this incredible, his name's Joe Nairmore. He was this incredible, just still is, incredible teacher. And he was like, let me tell you, I'm going to go over 3 principles of evangelism today. And he says, principle 1, the Holy Spirit converts. And then just a great communicator goes, I want us to sit in that for a while, guys. And God's got to do it. And so I think when you just realize, and this is why often are discouraged. We're like, well, I shared and I prayed and they came and, and I'm not seeing change. And so I think we trust God.
Yeah.
We keep moving forward. And I think we ask the question, I think about, Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. I think that's in Acts 8. It's like, who has God put in front of me?
That's so good.
And, he was a spiritually interested guy who was reading the Bible and didn't understand it. It's like, wow, that's the perfect kind of person. Lord, bring that person to me. Help me be faithful.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Elliot, who is the wife of the missionary Jim Elliot, she said, God must shake or there will be no shaking.
So good.
And so it's always very helpful for us
100%.
to remind ourselves that there are a lot of things that we have absolutely no control over. The godliest man I've ever known, Mike Exton Camper, he discipled me when I was at UNC Chapel Hill. He used to say all the time that only God can open someone's eyes to belief.
Yes.
Only God can draw someone to himself.
Yes.
Only God can convict someone of sin. And so to put it simply, what we as believers are called to do is we are just called to be as faithful as we can, to minister to the people who are around us, to maximize the relationships that God has given us. And then we've just got to trust the Lord. It's like, all right, I can't save this person. It's like, and so I think about parents who have wayward children. It's like, you may have done a fantastic job raising this person, but ultimately, there are certain things that only God can do. I mean, we look at the disciples. Even Judas was not a Christian.
Yeah.
And his leader for years was Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
and so there's a mystery to all of it. And so we just need to be encouraged by the reality that, yes, we need to be faithful to the opportunities we have, but we've just got to trust God with the things that we cannot control.
And I can't think of a better way to end today. Trust God. The Spirit is moving. He's working. We just need to have our eyes open to where He's moving and just be there and do what He has for us to do.
Amen. Good place to end.
It's great.